So, once again, we're continuing our reading in A Catholic Guide to Understanding Gender by Jason Everett. The argument is more people are coming out as trans only because society has become more accepting. The argument: many people assume that those who experience gender dysphoria possess intersex conditions or are gender non-conforming, didn't exist before the internet. While there has been a surge of interest in these topics in recent decades, history provides ample evidence that such individuals have been part of humanity for thousands of years. It's only because of greater visibility and tolerance that they're now finally free to be themselves. I'm going to let Jason cover this, although I have my own response to it. I'm sure that in considering the topic and in researching this particular subject, that he has been able to fully address this particular issue. Varied expressions and understandings of sexual identity are indeed as old as humanity itself. More than 2,000 years ago, the Roman Emperor, here's a name, Elagabalus, claimed he was a woman and preferred to be called a lady rather than a lord. Blurring gender distinctions was also a common practice woven into many ancient religious rites. In ancient Mesopotamia, gender-bending priests offered worship to various goddesses, including Ishtar. One of the poems written about her, dating back to the 23rd century BC, states, "To destroy, to create, to tear out, to establish are yours. To turn a man into a woman, and a woman into man are yours." End quote. Hey, sup, Hype? Welcome in. Vintage with 3 months. 3 months in a row. Thank you so very much, Vintage. You're doing very well this evening. So, here's the thing. It doesn't matter if a particular idea is historical. The serpent said in the garden, "Ye shall be as gods," right? Okay. I mean, that would be a historical argument for an idea. Certainly, ye shall be as gods. And many have certainly taken up that mantle and have lived out those ideas. But it is irrelevant. One particular argument that was brought up by Stephen Crowder in one of his "There Are Only Two Genders Changed My Mind," he brought up the idea that just because something could be found in a culture is irrelevant to the fact of whether or not it is true. And so when that argument was made by an individual who claimed to be non-binary and was making some sort of claim to some historical evidence for somebody having that idea or thinking that about themselves, he said, well, some cultures actually have slavery. And she couldn't get in her mind what Stephen was trying to argue. Stephen's argument was very plainly, just because you can find an idea somewhere in history is irrelevant, because that culture that you're claiming to have this idea, whatever, it also has slavery. Is that a legitimate idea? And they just hem and haw and absolutely reject anything and everything that can possibly be said. This goes back to the Ben Shapiro line of "facts don't care about your feelings." In a sense, yeah. And even then, as Ecclesiastes says, there is nothing new under the sun. There really isn't. Humanity's been around for a very long time. And people have had all kinds of different ideas. As evidence here in our first paragraph, we see that people have had these ideas for a very long time. But who cares? The question is whether or not it is a sound anthropology. It is astonishing to me to think that for whatever reason, we continue throughout history to have to fight against anthropologies, views of the nature of the human person that are contrary to the Catholic Church, on and on and on. So it is irrelevant whether or not a particular idea gains a certain amount of interest, or starts to trend, or begins to gain popularity in a particular culture. It is irrelevant. The question always comes back to whether or not is this the anthropology that is taught by the Church. And it seems very fitting for evil to continue to perpetuate anthropologies that are contrary to the Church. Similarly, Roman priests known as the Galli castrated themselves and dressed as women and served the goddess Cybele, an intersex deity said to have been born with male and female features. In his classic work in the 15th century, The City of God, St. Augustine said of them, as recently as yesterday, they plied the streets of Carthage with their oiled hair, their powdered faces, their languid limbs, and their feminine gait. End quote. St. Augustine also mentioned individuals who had intersex conditions. He wrote, as for the androgyni, or hermaphrodites, as they are called, though they are rare, yet from time to time there appears persons of sex so doubtful that it remains uncertain from which sex they take their name. Unquote. There have always been, biologically anyways, these chromosomal aberrations and these hormonal imbalances that have resulted in very obscure and rare intersex conditions. But nothing can be derived from that to conclude, therefore, the present ideology is correct. Therefore, cultures throughout history offer clear evidence that expressions of sexual identity have been understood and lived out in various ways. However, what accounts for the unprecedented rise in the number of young people who identify as trans today? The answer is complex. It cannot be reduced to increasing visibility and tolerance, though this does play a role. Captain says, I found out that in devil worship there's a demon called Baphomet who has the head of a goat and the body of a ram, also the breast of a woman. Additionally, this transgender push is more accepting of the occult because it allows them to express their perversion and confusion freely, whereas something like Christianity does not. The clothing designer who made children's gay pride clothing for Target stores was a prominent devil worshiper himself. There can be parallels that can be drawn that are very explicit in that manner. Now, if you were to interview and talk with a lot of people who are influenced by these ideologies, you will find that a lot of times they are people who are a lot more innocent than that, who are being hoodwinked, who are being drawn in because their favorite YouTuber or someone on TikTok or friends at school. Believe me, they have clubs at high schools. Every high school have GSA clubs where people get together and talk about a gender spectrum, and they talk about various sexual expressions and so on and so forth. I was a substitute teacher for 2.5 years. I went to over 15 different school districts, and I can tell you it is in every single high school. There are clubs that are specifically designed to spread the ideology of sexual perversion and gender confusion. I've seen it. Half the classrooms in which I subbed in also had rainbow flags. It's not a fun thing to have to do. Imagine the flood of a river swollen beyond its banks. If you were to trace the origin of each drop, you might find that a certain proportion originated in heavy downfall. Perhaps a dam had broken, or perhaps weather changes rapidly melted snow caps. Springs may have opened from underground sources. As a result of each of these factors, smaller streams and rivers became engorged, and the flow of their tributaries poured into the larger waterway that is now uprooted villages and the current downstream. A similar cascade of historical factors has contributed to the current deluge of interest in the topic of gender theory. To understand the various forces at work, a thorough examination of the intellectual foundation and architects of gender theory is essential. By examining the evolution of gender theory over the past century, it becomes clear that the exponential rise in individuals identifying as trans cannot be attributed to social acceptance alone. So, in other words, and this is what the right tries to do when it looks at Marxism, for example, and we will be looking at Marxism, is that the right is trying to understand exactly what the left is thinking and try to trace that back historically to who are the most modern proponents or influencers who have popularized this idea in our time and culture. All right. And it has to do more with, well, some people are simply enraptured in the idea, believe the idea, promote the idea, live and just internalize the idea. Someone on the right steps back and says, oh, wait a minute. Where does that even come from? Who first promoted that in our culture? How has that become popularized in recent times? And consider the philosophical underpinnings of the idea itself. Okay. Vintage says, I do think it's valid for high school to touch on some of that stuff if it is in a sex education context. Where the issues for me arises is when they teach kids that are like 10 years old what a minor subsection of people do with their genitalia. Right. Even when it comes to particular questions of sex education, my children go to Catholic schools, and so each time they come to learn more about their bodies as they go through puberty and start to understand reproduction and things like that, it's always in the context of books like Jason Everett, or it's in the context of John Paul II's Theology of the Body, things like that. So there's a time and place when these particular ideas are being introduced to students where they can talk about it. Obviously, my children go to a Catholic school, so for them, they get to consider these ideas within a Catholic context, particularly what is taught by the church. Unfortunately, not everybody gets to have that kind of experience. And so my children are very blessed to have had the kinds of experiences that they have. So Campton proposes there's absolutely no reason why a child has to know about anything sexual. Depends on what you mean by child, even if it's straight. I mean, I think it's fine for people who don't have to sexually reproduce, who don't commonly sexually reproduce, who are engaging in the actual sexual reproduction, do not really need to know a lot about that particular subject. They really don't. Children as young as 10 and 11 or even younger are being hypersexualized. They're being exposed to sex at a younger and younger age. It is, I think, very unfortunate with the pedophilia and bodily mutilation. It's ultimately the devil trying to turn the world on its head to destroy God's creation, to steer us for their way. So Vintage says, for this reason, I find it important for children to know what forms of touch is inappropriate. That way they can report to adults. Yeah, I mean, yeah. I think children who grow up in a non-sexualized environment will instantly have some sort of instinct about, wait a minute, this is off. I've never had anybody do that to me or touch that or do this for the first 10 years of my life. Something's off. And I feel awkward about that, inappropriately so. I wonder even if it doesn't need to be taught explicitly that just over the years from living 10 years, nobody's touched that before. It kind of makes me wonder if there's a kind of training that occurs at a deeper level based on what one has experienced as appropriate touch over the course of 10 years, whether or not they would be able to distinguish that from a new touch that, oh, wait a minute, this is new. Just how explicit does one need to really be and at what age? Like when I was about 10, we learned what parts of the body are private. I think I know what you're saying in terms of bathing suit areas. Because I remember even in preschool, my earliest daughter had to be explicitly taught about, we don't touch bathing suit areas on other children because they don't know. They just do things. They just say things and they need to be guided, morally speaking. They need to learn about other people's boundaries and the such. So we had to have that. We had to have that conversation with our preschooler. So I know what you mean by that. And it's not always necessarily true that just because somebody's a doctor, for instance, they can just do whatever they want and whatnot. Yeah, I mean, we've like the movie The Hand That Rocks the Cradle, for instance, is a prime example of a doctor who is an adult who was a little too friendly with a woman. Not that those sorts of things happen a lot. It's just unfortunate, I think. If we're talking about teenagers being taught sex education in a proper context, sure, what's being pushed in the current culture, though, is young children being brought to gay pride parades with naked people exposing themselves. Yeah, I don't think anybody's contesting that this is that those things are morally correct or acceptable. I don't think anybody here is saying that, anyways. But yes, we completely agree. People are being overly sexualized very young. I think Vintage was saying something along the lines of what I shared, and having to address particular what is appropriate and what's not, without necessarily having to go into, well, this is for, without having to explain to the child adult topics. We can still help and guide the child to understand what is and is not private, for instance. Yeah. And it's kind of inappropriate and inexcusable and disgusting, as Vintage says, for children to be exposed to things very early on. Yeah, the Larry Nassar issue. Yeah, that was very unfortunate. Coaches taking advantage of gymnasts, I think, was the context there. Very, very unfortunate. Yeah. Oh, he was the team doctor. Okay, sorry, I was just thinking maybe for a moment he was the coach, but yeah, and those things can happen. Unfortunately, those things can happen. There are people who are in a position of authority take advantage of people who put their trust in you. Yeah. Yeah. It's not appropriate for children to understand about behaviors that they're not engaging in. I think that is very fair. I think even until my son was like 15 years old, he still didn't know what reproduction was. There was no reason for him to know. There was just no reason for him to think, feel, process anything related to that, because it's not relevant to what is appropriate to his place in life. His goal is to focus on school, to get decent grades, to learn, to mature, to go through puberty, and that's it. The school at certain appropriate times will talk about certain subjects in biology and so on and so forth, but it's going to be done in a very tasteful and very intellectual academic manner, where it's not meant to arouse or to mislead people into behaviors. Like some schools that probably just pass out condoms or something and be like, hey, try it out, you'll see. Like, no. Stop that. That's grooming. You're grooming these children for a life of sexual perversity. Why are you doing that? Yeah. These people actually think that they're doing good, actually. Yeah. They think that they're doing good because they think that it's going to reduce teen pregnancy. But all they're doing is actually end up encouraging the behaviors. Yeah. See, the real solution is morality. Oh, wow. Isn't that an amazing concept? The solution is morality. Teach the children morality. But hey, they can't do that. They don't really have any sort of moral absolute which they could use as a point of reference. That's one of the problems with non-theistic perspectives that people try to push on our on students, on our children. Current age of the internet makes this difficult. Yes, indeed. Nobody should have a cell phone that connects to the internet, especially children. It's almost like parents and teachers are in the arms race against the internet regards to teaching kids about sex. Not necessarily. That's the parents' problem. They never should have put the internet in the children's hands. Being shown pornography at lunch table at school by a fellow student. Yep. Like I said, nobody should be having these phones. I don't even have a phone that connects to the internet. When I was 15, I just wanted to make comics with my friends and play video games. Kids should be kids and raised well. Yes, yeah, of course. I mean, I think that we all agree on that. Putting cell phones in the hands of children, worst possible thing. Trust me, if I would have grew up with a cell phone in my pocket, I'd spend most of my time in the bathroom looking at porn. I'm just speaking from my own personal upbringing, things that I was exposed to, and if I had a cell phone that could connect to the internet all the time, that's exactly what I would be doing, all the time. I'd become an addict. And I can't imagine these children being exposed to things earlier than I was. I can't, in my mind, I can't even begin to conceive in my mind their understanding of the world, their perception of the world, their experiences of things that they see, having these particular things. And see, it was bad enough that when I was a kid, I was exposed to everything. My mom and my dad had absolutely no qualms. We had HBO, we had Cinemax, we had Showtime, we had all of this stuff. When I was a teenager, I had a TV in my phone, in my room. Sorry, I had a TV in my room. We had cable. I had Cinemax at 2 a.m. You know exactly what I was doing. All right, I was a teenage boy. Put a cell phone in the hands of these kids? I didn't even begin to develop addictive behaviors in this regard until I was like 17, 18. You put the stuff in the hands of 9-year-olds? I can't even begin to fathom the impact, the sexualization that is going on in the minds of these children. I cannot even begin to fathom. Now, granted, not all kids would have been like me as a kid. You know, I was very curious and interested and had a very addictive personality. But to think that these kids are being exposed to things that I wasn't exposed to at a high level until I was like 16. I can't even begin to imagine what it's doing to 10-year-old minds. This is the worst evil I have ever witnessed in my life. You were also young amongst your peers. You were 15 in high school, my junior. Yeah, me too. I was 15. Most of your classmates. Oh, I see. In junior was 17. Let me see. I think I was 15 when I was a freshman. So. Oh, okay. Yeah. I mean, you were super young among the 17-year-olds. I can see that. Yeah, I think a lot of people are actually addicted to porn. A lot of people are. I think a lot of people who are don't even recognize or admit that they are. I mean, if a person says, "Oh, I'm not addicted to porn," okay, go a whole year without looking at it. Have you done that? No. Keep coming back, don't you? Yeah. Well. It's doing something to your mind, man. It's perverting your understanding of sex. It's perverting your... You see, here's the thing, and I hate to get explicit here, so this is not PG-13 at this moment, so the young people step away. But the idea is that during an orgasm, there's a release of endorphins and everything, a dopamine that's going on. It's supposed to bond you to your mate. It's supposed to create this very strong bonding between you and the person that you're engaging with together, right? It's supposed to be a very strong chemical bonding. But nowadays, that is done promiscuously, and there's multiple bondings that are going on with multiple partners. And if you've had conversation with anybody who has been addicted to pornography, they remember their names. They search the names out to see if they have engaged in other behaviors and other videos. You'll notice that they start to bond themselves, and maybe after a couple of years, they could probably tell you right off the bat. I know at least 10. I can name you 10 people right now that perform in these videos, and I just rotate through them like a harem. You know, like as if they're just additional wives that you can go to. You're obsessing about this one, and then a couple of days later you're obsessing about this one, and a couple of days later you're obsessing about it just rotates. It just constantly rotates. It's because you created bonds with these. It's like you're living in the Old Testament and you're King David and you got 600 wives and concubines. That's not the way we live anymore. That's not what we're called to. I had what is considered to be a severe porn addiction when I was 19 and got to the point where I wouldn't even talk to women because I viewed them as less important, because I felt like I didn't need them as much. Sure. No, that's fine. It's very relevant. It's a very common thing. And the thing is if men were to talk with one another more often and be more candid and more open, we would find that a lot of us have developed addictions or have developed problems. Not just with porn, but perhaps other things where we're trying to find validation, we're trying to find comfort, we're trying to find affirmation, we're trying to find comfort, right? And so, unfortunately, one of the strongest, deepest biological factors that drive men happen to be the drive for procreation. And so when that gets hijacked, all right, if that gets hijacked, we have to be honest with ourselves and with one another. We need accountability. We need assistance from friends. We need our friends to know what we're struggling with so we can get over it. Here's the thing. Yes, porn and other sorts of things can be very, very shameful. But if we remind ourselves that, hey, this is the very natural drive, there's nothing wrong with a man desiring to have an orgasm. There's nothing wrong with a man being attracted to a woman. There's no, just list all the things that are actually very natural and normal about what I'm experiencing, and then yes, but this was hijacked for this inappropriate means over here. This is what needs to change. All this other stuff about me, my interest in women, all of that sort of stuff, that doesn't have to change. What's wrong is this thing over here. This is the thing that needs to change. It's the wrong context. All right. So I think we need to be just very honest with ourselves and our friends. We need to talk about this. We need to get it out. It's very relevant to our culture. We grew up being exposed to this sorts of stuff in a way that other people weren't. I mean, most people way back when, it was because somebody peeked on somebody while they're taking a shower or something. It was so rare, but that interest gets hijacked. And we really do need to talk about it, because it's one of Satan's greatest tools of emasculating and isolating men from one another. It needs to be discussed. you know. And yeah, there are residual effects of things like that, not just depression. We're not just talking about depression, right? We have to bury magazines in the woods. Yeah, right? Right. Um, Not just depression. There's all kinds of residual effects to these sorts of things. The weakening of the willpower is, I think, one of the most emasculating and difficult aspects of all of this. Is that we were actually made for pleasure. It's something that God made for the confines of marriage, and we discovered it in the wrong context, and we're misusing it inappropriately, and we're trying to just bring that passion and everything back and put it in its proper context. And it can be very difficult to put the genie back in the bottle after somebody's engaged in these behaviors for so many years. Now, I know we're kind of going off on, you know, this particular tangent, which is fine. We'll turn this into a 7-parter if we have to. The left thinks that somehow they're liberating people from the confines of structure and being secluded, or is that the right word I'm thinking of? You're being secluded, you're being isolated, protected from being exposed to different things and everything else. Game Genie, yeah. And I think maybe some of the libertarian kind of ideas run along those lines. Just let people be exposed to things. Because if you're not exposed to things, you can't become inoculated. You can't process them. You can't think through them. But I think there's a time and place for those particular things to end up occurring. There was a time and place for that stuff, for children to process that stuff. And the thing is if they're not exposed to it, they don't have to worry about it, do they? They really don't. Need to be able to minimize indulgence as much as possible, whether it is dietary, mental, or physically. It's good to tell yourself no and only reserve indulging as a treat very occasionally. Yeah, I personally have this tendency where I'll go to the gym every day for a week. I'll eat clean, I'll chug water, I'll be very disciplined about my behaviors. I'm praying every day, everything's good, and all of a sudden I'll have like this 3-day bender where I'm like drinking beer, I'm struggling to pray, I'm not going to the gym, I'm eating chocolate ice cream, my will is weakened and I just want to just do whatever that feels good. And it's very, very unfortunate. And so I don't really know where that comes from. But I can imagine other people also experience that kind of weakening of the will. They experience that kind of a lack of discipline that kind of comes and goes. And I think over time, we can become more consistent. Swimmers, for instance, they experience this, where they'll go, they'll do training for swimming, and some training sessions will go really well and some don't go so well, and just if you stop there, it's not good. If you ask any of the people who are the top swimmers in the nation, they will tell you that eventually they got past that, and then they were able to swim very consistently. Their body became completely acclimated to the new course in life. And so I know that if we push through disciplines, if we continue with the good diet, if we continue to go to the gym, we continue to say no to our base passions when they are, it's not time yet, or it's the wrong context, or we're using it inappropriately, we'll begin to develop a consistency in our lives. Need to be able to minimize. An example I would use is fast food. Fast food was made to be a thing you would get as a treat every once in a while when you wanted to eat something unhealthy or tasty. It has been normalized to eat fast food daily these days. Okay, that's yeah. I have a friend who he runs a lot more consistent than I do. His body is completely acclimated. He runs 8 hours. Sorry, 8 hours. He runs 8 miles a day. He jumps on the treadmill. He's on that treadmill for like an hour, 15 minutes, and he does 8 miles almost every day, but he has one cheat day. And by cheat day means he doesn't go to the gym and he may eat certain things that he might not normally eat during the week. It's the exception. It's not the rule. So he's not going to McDonald's and having a double quarter pounder every single day. He's not eating that Big Mac every single day. But he's having that cheat day every 7 days or so where he can have a beer or have that double quarter pounder or have that bowl of chocolate ice cream. It's bad for you, yeah. And yes, it's. I think it's important for us to be able to discipline our will. Our will really needs to be trained. And when I say like our will, I'm speaking to myself here. I probably have the weakest will of anybody here. All right. So when I say that, what I'm saying is, I totally get it. I totally understand. I'm right there with all of us. You find that anger sometimes is good for the will? Anger? Sure. Yeah. I think there's a place for anger. Because it's where discipline and motivation meet. Like sometimes I'm really frustrated about something. I'm upset about something. I'll be on the treadmill and I'll try to redirect my anger into the run where I force myself. I kind of will myself to do a little bit more. And I think there's something healthy about that. Double quarter pounder put pounds on you. Yeah, of course it will. If you eat that thing every day. Over the last month and a half, last 45 days, I've lost 10 pounds because of some of the choices I've made. I've made some bad choices in there too, but I've made some really good choices where I'm going to the gym more often than I do. I went through like a 10-day stretch where I didn't have any alcohol at all and just ate super clean and just went to the gym and made a lot of better decisions. I couldn't sustain that. I was too weak for that as of yet. But I hope to get back to that kind of grind where I have a good 10-day stretch where I'm more faithful with prayer and things like that. So it's good. So you went down from 315 to 280 in 3 months. Back up to 290 now because you fell off after the 4th. And you're back to clean tomorrow. Yeah, I mean, it's more about the trajectory. I mean, sometimes my trajectory isn't all that good. But when you do have that to rely on, you can look back at your own experiences and say, you know what? I've actually been doing really well over the last 3 months. And that's extraordinary. because before that I just didn't care. I just did whatever I want whenever I wanted, and now I'm actually engaging in some sort of discipline. I'm doing some sort of behavioral change where I want better outcomes. I want better consequences. I want the good consequences that come from my good choices. So it just takes time. So, all right, folks. I was just going to be on for an hour. Thanks so much for hanging out. We had some really deep thoughts today. As usual, this is the place to do that for sure. Just know that whatever you folks are feeling, I'm feeling. Whatever you're going through, I'm probably going through it too. So nobody here is alone. We're all facing the same moral challenges. We're facing the same culture that wants us to just be depraved. And so we're just all here together to encourage one another on how to be more virtuous and to live a life of holiness, which is incredibly challenging. So, God bless everybody. Thanks for hanging out, and we'll continue to explore this topic at another time. Have a good night.